May 1945. The island of Okinawa had turned into hell on Earth. Explosions tore through the sky, Japanese machine guns never stopped firing, and the screams of the wounded echoed through the night. Amid the smoke and blood, a thin man, without a helmet, without a weapon, crawled alone among the bodies. His name was Desmond Doss. While everyone else retreated, he advanced. Without firing a single shot, he dragged a wounded comrade to the edge of the cliff, tied him with improvised ropes, and lowered him down slowly. When he managed to save one, he looked up to the sky and murmured, "Lord, please help me get just one more." That night, he repeated the prayer 75 times. And, alone, he became a legend. Before becoming a war hero, Desmond Doss was just a shy boy from Lynchburg, Virginia. Born in 1919, he grew up in a humble family. His father, a World War I veteran, struggled with alcoholism. His mother, a devoted Seventh-day Adventist, taught him from an early age the values of faith, simplicity, and absolute respect for life. Doss was a skinny, introspective child who spent hours reading the Bible and singing hymns at church. While other boys dreamed of playing soldier, he had another vision. He firmly believed in the commandment, "Thou shalt not kill." But his childhood was also marked by violence. He saw his father lose control in fights, and it scarred him deeply. He promised himself never to raise a weapon against another human being. Even so, within him there was a silent strength. Working. At a sawmill, he learned early on the weight of responsibility and the value of sacrifice. His co-workers only saw a frail young man, but inside grew an unshakable conviction. If the world went to war, he would not refuse to serve. But he would serve in his own way, without harming, only saving. Let's not forget that Doss's childhood took place during the Great Depression of the 1930s. Food shortages, unemployment, and poverty affected almost every family in rural Virginia. This harsh reality only strengthened his sense of discipline and faith. While many boys dreamed of becoming athletes or soldiers, Doss dreamed of being useful, even if in a quiet way. This contrast helps explain why, years later, he was not intimidated by an entire army calling him a coward. When World War II broke out, Desmond Doss knew he couldn't stand idly by. The entire country was calling for volunteers, and he wanted to serve as well. But there was one problem. He refused to carry a weapon. When he enlisted in the Army in August 1942, Doss shocked his superiors. A soldier who wouldn't pick up a rifle, who wouldn't train in shooting. To many, it sounded like cowardice. To him, it was loyalty to the commandment that guided his life. "Thou shalt not kill." The first months were hell. Fellow soldiers mocked him, pushed him around, called him a coward. Officers tried to force him to quit. But Doss didn't give in. He wanted to serve as a combat medic. While others trained to take lives, he trained to save them. This conflict wasn't just military, it was spiritual. In his prayers, Doss asked for strength to prove that courage didn't mean pulling a trigger, that an unarmed man could be just as brave as anyone else on the battlefield. And so, against all odds, Desmond Doss was accepted as a medic, a soldier without a weapon, ready to enter the greatest conflict in history. A curious detail is that there actually existed an official category called conscientious objector. But almost no one used this right because it was seen as cowardice. Many soldiers would rather go to jail than be labeled fearful. Now, imagine being on a military training field with hundreds of recruits shooting at targets, and in the middle of them, a young man standing still, holding only a Bible. The image seemed absurd, but for Doss, the absurdity would have been betraying his faith. Before reaching the bloody hill of Okinawa, Desmond Doss went through real trials by fire in the Pacific. In 1944, he was sent with his unit to Guam and then to Leyte, in the Philippines. There, the heat was suffocating. The dense jungle hid, ambushes at every step, and malaria and hunger were as cruel as Japanese bullets. It was in these battles that Doss began to prove he wasn't just a different soldier, he was indispensable. As attacks intensified, he ran back and forth, dragging the wounded, applying improvised tourniquets, and often exposing himself to enemy fire to save a fallen comrade. Soldiers who once called him a coward began to see him as an angel on the battlefield. One of them later recalled, "While we fired to survive, Doss ran unarmed to save. I've never seen courage like that." These early battles shaped Doss's confidence and faith. He knew his greatest test was still to come, but he also knew God had prepared him for something bigger, and that something had a name: Hacksaw Ridge, Okinawa. The battles in Guam and Leyte were a true survival laboratory. Soldiers' accounts describe mosquitoes the size of bees, suffocating heat, and enemies hidden in caves launching surprise attacks. Many men fell ill before even entering combat, victims of dysentery and malaria. But Doss, physically frail, stood firm. It wasn't brute strength that kept him going, but his conviction. This impressed his comrades, who had already begun calling him the Angel Without a Rifle. The spring of 1945 brought one of the most brutal chapters of World War II, the Battle of Okinawa. Atop a steep cliff known as Hacksaw Ridge, American soldiers faced hell. The terrain was filled with trenches, tunnels, and Japanese machine guns that turned every advance into a massacre. In the middle of this scene stood Desmond Doss, a man without a weapon, armed only with his faith and a medic's kit. The battle began. Explosions shook the ground. Cries of pain echoed, and bodies fell at every moment. The American troops were pushed back, massacred, forced to retreat. But among the wounded left behind, Doss stayed, alone, unarmed, under enemy fire. He ran from wounded to wounded, applying improvised tourniquets, dragging bloody bodies to the edge of the cliff, tying ropes and lowering them one by one to safety. Each descent was a prayer. "Lord, help me get one more." Night fell, but Doss did not stop. For hours he continued his impossible mission. When his strength finally gave out, 75 men had been saved by his hands. 75 lives that should have been lost on that field of death, but were returned to their families because one soldier refused to give up. That day, Desmond Doss didn't fire a single bullet, and yet he became a legend. For historians, Okinawa was the bloodiest battle in the Pacific Theater. It is estimated that over 200,000 people died, including civilians. It was considered a preview of the invasion of Japan, and everyone knew it would be brutal. What's most remarkable is to think that amidst this apocalyptic scenario, a single man, unarmed, managed to change the fate of dozens of families. It was as if he proved right there that a saved life is worth more than any military victory. When the guns finally fell silent in Okinawa, the name Desmond Doss spread among officers and soldiers alike. The feat of that unarmed man was almost unbelievable. 75 men saved, one by one, in the heart of hell. In October 1945, on the White House lawn, Desmond Doss was called before President Harry Truman. The moment was solemn. Truman, a man used to decorating war heroes, held Doss's hand longer than usual and said, "You deserve this honor more than I can say. I'm proud of you." And there, before the nation, Desmond Doss received the Medal of Honor, the highest U.S. military decoration. He was the first conscientious objector in American history to receive such recognition. But the most remarkable thing was Doss's own reaction. He wasn't proud of the medal, but of each life saved. To him, that honor was not just a symbol of bravery, but a testimony of faith, sacrifice, and the possibility of keeping one's conscience even in times of war. While others became heroes for their victories on the battlefield, Doss became a hero for saving lives amidst death. His Examples showed that courage is not only wielding a weapon, but staying true to one's principles, even when the whole world thinks it's impossible. When Truman presented the medal, the scene caught the photographer's attention. Doss seemed embarrassed, looking down, almost trying to avoid the cameras. Many veterans later commented that they had never seen such a shy hero. And perhaps this explains why his story was not immediately picked up by Hollywood. He didn't want fame. Only decades later would his journey gain recognition, when he finally accepted that the world needed to know the message behind his act. After the war, Desmond Doss could have chosen the path of fame. Hollywood came knocking. Journalists wanted exclusive interviews. The entire country wanted more of the unlikely hero who had saved 75 men without firing a single shot. But Doss did not see himself as a hero. To him, everything he had done in Okinawa was nothing more than fulfilling his duty, the duty to save lives. And so, while many veterans returned with ambitions of public careers, Doss chose something very different: the silence of a simple life. He returned to rural Virginia, married Dorothy, the great love of his youth, and devoted himself to his family. Instead of using his fame to get rich, he worked on a small farm, living humbly and quietly. The scars of war, however, remained. Doss suffered from severe health issues: tuberculosis caught in the trenches, multiple surgeries that left him with only one lung and without ribs on one side of his body. But even in hardship, he never complained. When invited to speak at veterans events, he always repeated the same phrase: "I'm not a hero. The real heroes are the ones who didn't come back." This humility only increased the admiration the country felt for him. Doss became an example not only of courage but of integrity, a man who proved that even the greatest of honors did not need to change a man's essence. An interesting fact is that Doss remained resistant to invitations to become a celebrity. He declined public appearances and even patriotic campaigns that could have turned him into a political icon. His priority was his family and community. He planted crops, helped neighbors, and lived like any other man from the countryside. The contrast was striking. While some veterans were revered in parades, he preferred the anonymity of his small farm. Desmond Doss lived far from the spotlight, but his legacy surpassed any medal or title. He was the first conscientious objector to receive the Medal of Honor, not for taking lives, but for saving 75, dragging wounded men one by one under enemy fire, repeating quietly, "Lord, help me get just one more." His story inspired generations. Soldiers saw him as proof that courage did not need weapons. Religious leaders recognized him as an example of unwavering faith. And ordinary people saw in him the essence of the unlikely hero, a common man who, faced with the impossible, chose to act. Decades later, his story reached the world again through the film Hacksaw Ridge, directed by Mel Gibson. The movie showed new generations what veterans already knew, that Desmond Doss was not just part of World War II history, he was part of the very definition of heroism. Doss died in 2006 at the age of 87, leaving behind not just the memory of an act of bravery, but an eternal example of faith, humility, and humanity. Today, his name is engraved in schools, memorials, and above all, in the memory of every soldier who knows that saving a life may be the greatest act of courage in war. Desmond Doss taught us that true strength lies not in destroying, but in preserving. And that is why, even decades after Okinawa, his story lives on, as a flame that never goes out. Today, Doss's name is studied in U.S. military academies, not just as a historical curiosity, but as an example of resilience and values. His principles still challenge the traditional idea of war. How can someone, in the middle of hell, choose not to kill and still be considered one of the bravest soldiers in history? It is this question that keeps his memory so relevant, decades after his death. Desmond Doss was born in a small town in Virginia. He grew up poor, humble, guided by faith and by the principles of nonviolence. In any other context, he might have lived as an ordinary man, forgotten by history. But in Okinawa, when all the values he carried seemed to contradict the hell of the trenches, he showed that courage is not measured by the weapon you carry, but by the lives you save. Alone, through an endless night, he climbed up and down that cliff dozens of times, bringing back men who had no hope left. And each time, he repeated the same prayer: "Lord, let me save just one more." His faith became strength, his compassion became power, and his determination turned the impossible into reality. After the war, Desmond Doss never boasted. He lived, humbly, always saying he had done nothing more than his duty. But the truth is, without firing a single shot, he wrote one of the most extraordinary chapters in military history. Decades later, the film Hacksaw Ridge brought his story to millions around the world. And so, Doss's legacy became eternal, not only as a soldier, but as a symbol of faith, courage, and humanity. Desmond Doss reminds us that heroes can arise from the most unlikely places. That one doesn't need to destroy to be remembered. That sometimes the greatest weapon a person can carry is the conviction to save lives. Did you enjoy this story? Then subscribe to the channel and comment which story you'd like to see next. Together, we'll keep discovering how ordinary men wrote extraordinary pages of history.